Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 27. My job. The male druid who was hostile to me just now, he's not from the Moonlight Society, right? The tunnel was filled with water. Matthew asked as he lifted his pants. Of course, he's from the Earth Society. I've never seen him before, so I guess Samantha asked him to help. Ella said happily. Fortunately, Samantha held him back. Matthew smiled. Indeed. Ella obviously didn't understand what Matthew meant. She chattered about the story of the ancient tiger, Eli is an orphan. A long time ago, his parents had provoked an enemy and were chased to the west of the Guardian Highland near Storm Valley. In order to buy time, Eli's father died. Meanwhile, Eli's mother carried him in his swaddling clothes and crawled into the tiger cave to avoid the pursuit of his enemies. Unfortunately, his mother was injured, and she died after climbing into the cave. Before she died, she saw an aggressive but exhausted tiger. Eli's mother said to the tiger, "Eating me is enough for you to fill your stomach. Please let my child go." And so, the tiger silently ate her. The entire process, she didn't make a sound. Perhaps she fainted from the pain, or perhaps she was already dead. In short, Eli, who had memories of his childhood, witnessed this process. It was hard to imagine how he felt when he recalled this matter. After eating Eli's mother, the tiger took Eli to the depths of the cave. There, Eli found two tiger cubs that had their eyes closed. That's right. The tigress had just given birth. She was very weak and urgently needed to replenish her energy. If it wasn't for Eli's mother, she might have left the cave to look for food. Even if Storm Valley was the tiger's territory, it was still a very dangerous thing. The tigress, who had recovered her strength, began to feed her cubs. Eli also had a share. I believe you can guess the story behind it. Eli was raised by the tigress and received the favor of the god of earth in the process. His first wild transformation was a fierce tiger. Later on, through various fortuitous encounters, he mastered the transformation technique of the saber-toothed tiger and the legendary creature, the ancient tiger. His combat power was extremely terrifying and could not be measured by a normal Tier 3. Therefore, people had given him the title of a Tier 4 shapeshifter in advance, which was the ancient tiger. Matthew nodded his head after listening. A very rough life. Then did he help his parents take revenge? Ella thought for a moment and said uncertainly. I don't know. I think so. In short, he is very powerful. If you meet him underground in the future, it is best to avoid him. His eyes were staring ahead. All the skeleton soldiers stopped in their tracks. Drip. 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 The sound of water dripping from the cave on the left was disturbing. And in that deathly silent atmosphere, the air in all directions suddenly became slightly agitated. Matthew! Ella belatedly exclaimed, "They're coming." However, before she could finish her sentence, Matthew's robe instantly bulged and folded. He turned into a raven and flew away. Hey, Matthew, wait for me. Ella was so anxious that her voice turned hoarse. Like Matthew, she landed on a horizontal stone pillar. When she looked down again, one after another, rat-sized Zerg larvae emerged from the darkness. They crawled like silkworms, their bodies covered in purple-green pus, and their speed was faster than ordinary people. Matthew! Ella couldn't help but scream. The most terrifying thing about the Zerg larva is its parasitism. As long as you wound them even a little, they can consume any living thing with parasites. We're finished. The battle below became more and more chaotic. There were more than a dozen larvae dealing with each skeleton soldier. Just as Ella was burning with anxiety, Matthew finally said, "Other than infection and parasitism, what other abilities do they have?" Ella was stunned. "Isn't this scary enough?" Matthew looked at her as if she was an idiot. "It is indeed terrifying to living creatures, but my summons are all undead. Can these bugs infect skeletons?" As if to confirm Matthew's words. Suddenly, there was a sound from below. The two lowered their heads and looked down. A fist-sized larva crawled onto the knee of a skeleton soldier. Its body rapidly shriveled. A large amount of pus came out of the larva's body and covered the bones tightly. Chirp chirp. A sound similar to a mouse's cry was heard, and more larvae gathered. They rushed to the place where the pus was flowing and were eager to give it a try. A sharp sword descended from the sky. The blade sliced through the larvae bodies like tofu, and the pus exploded like juice. Skeleton soldiers did not use any skills. It only slashed its sword back and forth at the place where the larvae gathered, and a large number of larvae died. After it was done, it even touched its knees. After wiping off the pus, its bones were as bright as new. Hint: your summoned creature is immune to the infection of the Zerg larva. Your summoned creature, skeleton number 3, has killed 13 Zerg larvae. Your XP plus 13, EXP accumulated. The battle continued noisily. Matthew sat on the wall and watched. Summoning his underlings to fight while eating popcorn was the greatest pleasure for a necromancer. Moreover, from the moment the first skeleton soldier raised his dagger, the outcome of this encounter had already been decided. Just as Ella had said, the most terrifying thing about Zerg larva was its pervasive infectious ability. Against this kind of infection, even high resilience might not be enough to resist it. This creature was the nightmare of all living creatures. However, it was different for the undead creatures. You couldn't infect a skeleton with parasites. Without the biggest threat, the Zerg larva was essentially no different from a larger rat. No matter how slow the skeleton soldier's reaction was, it could still kill a few insects with a single slash. What was more interesting was that the Zerg larvae lacked intelligence. They seemed to be unable to judge the situation on the field and could only rely on their instincts. The battle was clearly one-sided, but they were still pouncing on the skeleton soldiers one after another. After a short 15 minutes, there were more than 100 corpses of Zerg larvae on the ground. Matthew's skeleton soldiers were almost unharmed. The reason for the word almost was because one of the skeleton soldiers had twisted its ankle when it was cutting the bugs. However, it was a skeleton. So Matthew could just twist it back after the incident. After this battle, Matthew found that most of the skeleton soldiers' soul fire had condensed a little. Undead creatures could also increase their strength through fighting and killing, but the progress was not obvious. Matthew was busy planting trees every day, so the skeleton soldiers had been ignored. Now that he finally had a chance to show off his skills, Matthew was quite satisfied with the result. So is this the goddess scheme? The undead creatures seemed to have a natural counter to the Zerg race that caused this place to wither and decay. He didn't stay here for too long. After resting for a while, he ordered Soldier to continue leading the team deeper. Matthew and Ella were flying above, observing and commanding. The road was smooth. Other than the 2 infected humans on the 3rd level, they smooth sailing. The skeleton soldiers killed all the enemies without any injuries and emptied all the hives along the way. Although there weren't any large spoils of war, the occasional dozens of gold coins and the XP that allowed the skeleton soldiers to level up quickly made Matthew feel that this trip was worth it. As for the 2 infected bodies, one of them was ambushed by Soldier when they first met. The latter cut half of his body with a short knife, instantly making him lose his combat ability. The other one fought a straggling skeleton soldier. The fight was intense. The strength of the infected body was shocking. By the time Soldier and the other skeleton soldiers arrived, the skeleton had been mostly torn apart. This was also the first casualty Matthew had encountered while exploring the cave. What should we do? Matthew, you're missing a skeleton. Should we continue? Ella asked nervously. They were now close to the entrance of the 4th level. According to Ella, from the 4th level onwards, this kind of wild infection would become common. Of course, it was not necessarily the infection of humans but more of all kinds of animals. The infected body had the infection ability of a larva, strong strength, and good melee skills. Druids recognized them as troublesome creatures. What missing skeleton? Matthew chuckled. Then, he took out his withered wood staff and chanted at one of the infected bodies. Under Ella's surprised gaze, a staggering skeleton soldier stood up from the pool of red and green blood. So as long as there are corpses, you can summon skeletons endlessly, right? Ella's eyes widened. I guess so. Matthew added in his heart, the key is still my upper limit for summoned creatures. All right, let's treat it as defeating evil with evil, Ella muttered. Matthew looked at her silently. She hurriedly said, then let's hurry to the next level. Matthew shook his head. No, today's mission ends here. Ella was stunned. Why? Did my words offend you? I'm sorry, Matthew. I apologize to you. I can finally understand the goddess wisdom. Necromancers are indeed more suitable for killing bugs than druids. Matthew yawned. No, it has nothing to do with that. There are only 4 hours left before dawn. I have to rush home to sleep now. I still have to wake up early tomorrow. Wake up early? Why did you wake up early? Ella didn't understand. Planting trees. Matthew said confidently. Don't you know that's my job? The next evening, Matthew simply refused the eager Ella outside the door. He sat down by the bed. Soldier's figure slowly appeared in the corner of the room. Matthew checked the progress of the planting mission. In the past week, he had worked overtime and planted a total of 104 trees, which naturally corresponded to 10 strengthening opportunities. He didn't hesitate and threw everything onto Soldier. 10 rays of light flashed, and Soldiers leveled up 3 times, reaching level 9. There were also 7 new keywords. 4 of them were blue and white keywords. Your summoned creature, Soldier, has received keywords, Shadow Strike, blue, /poison, blue, /farming technique, white, /nurture the children, white, dot. Chapter 28. Bondage Master. Shadow Strike was an ingenious attack. It could use the enemy's shadow to launch a short displacement and then instantly cause extremely great damage. Matthew made a straw doll for Soldier to demonstrate on the spot. The result was quite shocking. If Soldier's Shadow Strike hits you, not to mention fragile skin, even a close combat unit around tier 3 and below medium armor will have to shed a layer of skin. What was worse was that Shadow Strike was only the beginning of a series of combos for rogues after they got close. Take Soldier's Sword Dancer as an example. After Shadow Strike, it could immediately follow up with Burial Dance, a killer move with extremely high damage. It was very difficult for low-level adventurers to resist such sudden and continuous explosive attacks. As expected, when fighting with rogues, not letting them get close is the first rule. Matthew didn't think that Garcia's armor could last long when he was entangled by an elite rogue. In his opinion, magic armor was the last layer. When you were forced to reveal your last layer, your life was not far from being controlled by others. Of course, this did not mean that the last layer was not important. The other blue keyword was poison. This was a keyword that included a series of minor skills such as identifying poison, extracting poison, making poison bottles, and smearing weapons with poison. Due to his limited energy, Matthew knew very little about herbal medicine and pharmacology. Now that Soldier had gained such an ability, he could be considered to have made up for his shortcomings in this aspect. In the future, I can ask Soldier to collect poison and make more poison bottles. He can use them himself, and my crossbow will be more lethal. If shadow strike and poison were still within Matthew's knowledge. The last two white keywords were hard to understand. What the hell was farming techniques? Could it be that soldier was actually a farmer when he was alive? Nurture the children. Did he raise small animals like pigs before he died? Or was he a man with rich experience in raising human babies? Matthew looked at soldier in confusion. The latter still responded to Matthew's gaze with a blank expression. Soldier looked away. He found a spot in the corner of the bed and quietly sat down. Matthew felt a little helpless. I didn't expect that the gray keyword that had just appeared would take effect so soon. Slacking off, Gray, your skeleton has learned to slack off in non-combat mode. Fortunately, it was limited to non-combat states. If it would slack off in battle, then Matthew would have to consider whether he should give him all the subsequent enhancements. His gaze went past the gray keywords. The good news was, the last two keywords were both purple. The bad news was, these two keywords looked a bit strange. Shadow dance steps, purple. Your skeleton can quickly and violently twist its crotch to please and charm the target. At the same time, when it was dancing, a part of its dance steps could cross the shadow realm, thus achieving the goal of speeding up the approach to the target. Bondage master, purple. Your skeleton is good at using rope skills, including binding, even when not in battle. Requirements: to prepare for this skill, please prepare at least a strong enough magic rope for him. So, what exactly does the sword dancer profession is about anyway? Matthew was deeply puzzled. He looked at soldier again. The latter hesitated for a moment. Then, he got up and twisted his hips at Matthew. The air fluctuated slightly. He felt dizzy. He pressed down on soldier's restless crotch. I understand now. The dance steps are indeed powerful. This should be infused with some kind of ritual spell. Matthew rubbed his temples in an attempt to wake himself up. If this continued, he would probably feel that the skeleton in front of him had become more beautiful. This was the effect of charm. His willpower wasn't low, and he was soldier's master, but he was still affected. If it was someone else. Matthew suddenly felt a little more expectant. He sized up soldier. He realized that the skeleton was very different from the others. His bones were full and strong, and there were a lot of silver light spots inside. Compared to other skeletons, he was cleaner, so clean that he was almost unstained. His entire body was covered with bones that were as white as jade and had silver edges. Have you bathed yourself? Matthew asked thoughtfully. Soldier was stunned. 10 seconds later. He nodded uncertainly. Matthew looked helpless. Soldier was good at everything. He had great potential, but his intelligence was too low. This was also a common problem with undead creatures. Even the powerful bone dragon fully only had 4 points of intelligence. Of course, intelligence did not completely represent IQ, but those with low intelligence usually did not have much of an IQ. Soldier's current mental state was equivalent to a 5-year-old child. It was fine with Matthew's command. However, if Matthew let soldier go alone, it would be 100% likely to cause trouble. It seems that Peggy is indeed extraordinary. As expected of someone I risked my life to find in the land of gold. Matthew's eyes were filled with nostalgia. However, very quickly, his memories were interrupted. Saber, saber, me, saber. A thought came intermittently from soldier's soul fire through the undying contract. You want a good saber? A short one. Two. Soldier replied. I understand. I will forge 2 suitable daggers for you as soon as possible. Thank you, Master. This time, the response only took 3 seconds. Due to your promise, soldier, skeleton's loyalty to you has increased to 99. Those you nurture will be more loyal to you, after all. After having a simple dinner in the small wooden house, it was already dark outside. Matthew pushed the door open and walked out. A faint white light flickered in the oak forest not far away. The oak fairies that had been hiding in the dark during the day came out in full force. Except for Princess Lulu, almost all the fairies were dancing around Ella the owl. Ella was standing on the crown of an oak tree. Her eyes were tightly shut as she muttered something. Faint divine spells spread out like ripples. Matthew walked in the forest. The feeling of being watched by pairs of kind eyes came back. She was enlightening the oak forest. As a nature soul favored by the goddess of moonlight, Ella's attainments in the nature domain were much higher than Lulu's. Through the ritual of enlightenment, she could inject more wisdom and vitality into the oak forest. The oak trees became healthier as a result. And in the long process of growth, if there were someone to enlighten them, then there would be a higher probability of a tree spirit being born among them, which was what people often called the tree guardian. If they were lucky, they might even give birth to one or two tree shepherds. This was extremely beneficial to the development of the forest. However, it also meant a great consumption for the creature casting the enlightenment. Matthew's actions had been unpredictable. Ella was afraid that he wouldn't go to get rid of the Zerg tonight, so she fulfilled the promise Matthew had asked her to fulfill in advance. Hint: your nature partner, Ella, has completed an enlightenment ritual for your oak forest. Your domain, oak tree, has received a slight upgrade. There was such a benefit. Enlightenment could not only benefit the oak trees but also strengthen his domain power. Looks like I have to think of a way to get Ella to come over more after the 3 years are up. The only uncertain factor was actually Lulu. As a nature soul, Lulu had obviously regarded the oak forest as her habitat. She could tolerate Ella coming here to cast enlightenment in the short term. But as time passed, she definitely couldn't take it. Because this would be stepping on her territory. Lulu should have a similar ability in the future, right? In his thoughts, the white light in the forest had already faded. The oak fairies vanished. Ella dragged her exhausted body to Matthew. "Hey Matthew, I did pretty well, didn't I?" Ella asked with her head down. He could feel the joy of the oak trees. Ella was obviously not slacking. Matthew's attitude naturally softened. "You've worked hard, Ella. You did well." Ella said happily, "Then can we remove the Zergs now?" Under Ella's puzzled gaze, he asked, "Can you germinate?" Ella seemed to have guessed something, so she nodded hard. I know, Matthew. That is the basic skill of nature's soul. I know what you want me to do. You said that your job is to plant trees, and I see you carrying saplings around every day. So, have you used up all the saplings?" Matthew said approvingly, "You're very smart. I don't have enough saplings, but I have a small greenhouse where I'm cultivating some oak seeds. However, if I follow the normal process, their germinating speed will be too slow, so I want you to help me germinate them. You don't have to ripen them all. Just a small portion will do. We can do it in batches. As for the specifics, it depends on your physical condition. After all, you have just completed a round of enlightenment. You must have consumed a lot of energy." Ella said impatiently, "Take me there. We don't need to do it in batches. I'll germinate all of them tonight." Matthew hesitated. "Is this okay? Your body?" Ella was full of confidence. "Don't underestimate the perseverance of the nature soul, Matthew. Isn't it just a small greenhouse? I can still withstand it." 20 minutes later. At Matthew's house in Rolling Stone Town. In the greenhouse on the east side. Peggy looked at the shocked Ella with interest. Is this the little greenhouse you were talking about?" Miss Owl said in a trembling voice. She looked at the endless many greenhouses in front of her. Her vision turned black, and she almost fainted. The previous owner of this house left behind a ritual field with folded space here, but my magic power is insufficient, so I can only activate a small portion. Currently, it only has an area of less than 15 acres. Matthew said pleasantly, "Do you need me to introduce you to your future working environment in detail?" Chapter 29. You have my blessing. No, there's no need, Ella said. Matthew could only continue regretfully. Maybe I was wrong with my wording, but for me, this greenhouse is far smaller than the one I have in mind. And I don't mind if you do it in batches. There's no need to rush. However, Ella showed unprecedented stubbornness. No, she said seriously. Matthew, nature souls will never go back on their words. Just you wait. After tonight, all the seeds will sprout. She flapped her wings and flew to the first seed shed. A faint natural aura spread out, and Ella began to work energetically. Is she the arrogant nature soul that you told me about before? She doesn't look like a bad person. Peggy asked with interest. Matthew nodded in agreement. Of course, she's not a bad person. In fact, most of the nature souls are very suitable to be friends. They're just blinded by the discrimination against my profession. However, this is not their fault. Necromancers do have a bad reputation. In fact, Matthew quite liked to deal with nature's souls, and he even liked most druids. Their emotions were all written on their faces. They were straightforward folks. One wouldn't need to worry about betraying around them. So now that you have this child laborer, does this mean that I don't have to be responsible for the greenhouse in the future? Peggy asked expectantly. Matthew smiled. Ella is only here to help. She's new here, and there are still many details that she doesn't know. She needs you to teach her. Peggy pursed her lips. All right, I knew that you damn necromancers wouldn't let a free labor like me go so easily. Matthew smiled and handed over an irregular crystal that was emitting white light. This month's salary. Peggy's soul fire instantly turned into the shape of a smiling face. Oh, Matthew, you are the kindest necromancer I have ever seen. I bet other necromancers won't pay their salaries on time like you. When I was still in the Golden Pit, I had a friend who was a contract creature of an eccentric old man. He told me that the damned necromancer not only wanted him to be at the forefront of the battle, but he also wanted him to help take care of his everyday life, liking bathing him and so on. I also suspected that the necromancer had molested him. However, I had no evidence. Plus, my friend had no ability to resist because he had signed a contract. Every time we met, he would look for me to discuss how to get rid of that necromancer. Unfortunately, he did not succeed in the end. The last time I saw him was after a terrifying battle. At that time, he had almost lost all the important bones in his body. I was very worried about his condition, but he smiled and told me that it was not without good news. At least he wouldn't be asked to bathe the old man anymore. Later, it was proven that he was right, but only partially. That damned necromancer had indeed stopped molesting him. Instead, he removed all his bones before his eyes and gave them to the other skeletons. The excess bones were broken down into a bone powder, and even the last soul fire was used to light the lamp. How despicable. Ah, I'm sorry, I've said too much, but I still want to say dash. Thank you, Matthew. I only did what a man with a bottom line should do, so you don't have to thank me, Peggy. But what I'm curious about is, how did you know what happened to your friend? Peggy hesitated for a moment, her soul fire swaying slightly. Maybe I have a telepathic connection with him? In short, I saw those images before he died. I thought that after becoming an undead creature, I would no longer be afraid of death, but that's not the case. I'm still afraid of losing my self-awareness. Every time I think back to the scene I saw at that time, I feel terrified. At this point, Peggy's soul fire suddenly flickered intensely. Her voice was trembling. Matthew's expression changed. He quickly put one hand on Peggy's back. "Hey, Peggy, stop reminiscing about those unpleasant things. Do you still remember what I told you when I brought you out of the golden pit? We can do it. I've already established a good relationship with nature's soul, and even the goddess of moonlight has blessed me. I think I'm on the right path. We only need time to solve the mystery that has been bothering you. But before that, you have to be strong. You can't be defeated by yourself," Matthew said as he tried to calm Peggy's surging emotions. He gently hugged Peggy's cold skeleton. A wave of intense sadness surged into Matthew's mind. He gritted his teeth and supported Peggy with determination. This scene should have been beautiful. Unfortunately, there was a difference in height between the two of them. Peggy was finally freed from that intense, sorrowful mood. "Thank you, Matthew. You've helped me again." Peggy's soul fire gradually stabilized, and her tone also returned to calmness. "It's been more than a year since I last felt that terrible feeling. I thought I had gotten rid of that nightmare, but it still didn't let me go." Matthew was already used to such situations. When he first signed with Peggy, she would get sick almost every week or so. Later, Matthew brought her to the material world to live, and she slowly got better. "What did you see just now?" Matthew asked softly. "It's similar to last time. There are countless torn corpses on a boundless grassland. The ground is black, and the grass is dripping blood," Peggy said calmly. "Perhaps that was the most memorable memory you had when you were alive," Matthew speculated. "Perhaps." Peggy's mood recovered very quickly. She even took the initiative to joke about Matthew. "You're hugging me too tightly." Matthew subconsciously let go quickly, but he immediately reacted and looked at Peggy with anger and amusement. "Oh, Matthew, you're too gentle. It hurts." Peggy smiled proudly. "But to be honest, I'm a little touched. If I weren't already dead, I would have married you." Matthew was about to answer. The two of them simultaneously felt a shocked gaze staring at them. Matthew looked sideways. I interrupting something?" Ella said in disbelief. "Zerg nest, 4th level." After a not-so-intense battle, the skeleton soldiers were slowly cleaning up the battlefield. Matthew, on the other hand, looked seriously at the dispirited Ella beside him. This stubborn nature's soul was forcefully taken away from her post after a quarter of the oak seeds had ripened. If Matthew didn't stop her, he was worried that the other party would die in his shed that night. "Are you feeling better?" Matthew asked with concern. "Much better. Don't underestimate the recovery ability of nature's soul," Ella replied weakly. However, her mental state was much better than when she first entered the cave. The moonlight woodland was her home. Here, the energy she had consumed would be quickly replenished. "That's good." Matthew chose his words carefully. "Actually, what you saw earlier was a misunderstanding." Ella suddenly quivered. "Matthew, you won't kill me to silence me, will you?" She looked at him nervously. "The goddess will keep an eye on you." Matthew rubbed his temples and said helplessly, "If I wanted to silence you, I definitely wouldn't have waited until now." Ella let out a long breath. That's good. Don't take it to heart, Matthew, I understand." "No, I mean. But I know that there are many necromancers who develop feelings for their summoned creatures. I have to admit that compared to the other skeletons, Peggy is a real beauty. At the very least, she still has all her bones." At this point, she paused for a long time before she suppressed some emotions and said, "You two have my blessing." "Congratulations." Matthew slapped his forehead. Now how was he going to explain himself? Master, there's a hardcover book," Soldier suddenly transmitted intermittent thoughts. He avoided the pile of corpses of the infected on the left side of the road. He came to the other side where Soldier was. There was a corpse of an infected human whose stomach had been cut open. Judging from the injuries, Soldier had done it himself. There was a hardcover notebook on the body, probably from the infected person's pocket. There were hundreds of gold coins scattered around the book, which meant that the infected person was once very rich. Matthew did not approach. In the hierarchy of the Zerg, an ordinary infected person was only stronger than a new larva, but an infected corpse was the breeding ground for more than a dozen larvae. After killing them, they had to be dealt with properly to prevent future troubles. Soldier, bring the book over. Soldier did as he was told without hesitation. A larva suddenly crawled out of the infected man's eye socket and jumped straight at Soldier's thigh bone. A sword shadow flashed. Soldier accurately cut the larva into two in midair. He had also picked up the book. Matthew took the notebook, wiped the blood and pus on the cover with a rag, and then looked at it. The size of the notebook was only slightly larger than Matthew's palm. The cover had a pattern made of gold powder that looked like some kind of cuneiform text. Matthew felt that this pattern was somewhat familiar, but he couldn't recall it for a moment. He opened the cover. However, the blood-stained first sentence made his body tremble. The Empire ordered us to study Shin'ik power on the Dawn, but the terrible Zergs destroyed everything. It wasn't the content that moved Matthew. Instead, the word Empire finally triggered the association in his mind. He finally understood why the pattern on the cover looked familiar. Isn't this the symbol of the Unto Empire? I remember that the Unto Empire was the big villain in the game in my previous life. Almost all the monsters in the dungeon were related to their laboratories scattered all over the universe. Matthew's emotions surged. His previous judgment was correct. He had indeed transmigrated into the game world, or at least he was in the same universe as that game. He couldn't wait to read the rest of the notebook. Chapter 30. Numbers against a Necromancer. There wasn't much content in the notebook. From the tone of the narrator, he should be a low-level researcher at a laboratory in the Unto Empire. His research is on Shin'ik. It was an extremely powerful ability that was different from magic. It was mentioned in the notebook. The Unto Empire seemed to have captured a batch of experimental subjects that were very suitable for studying Shin'ik powers. Unfortunately, the level of the narrator was too low, so he did not have the opportunity to come into contact with them. He did not even know what kind of creatures they were. He was in charge of the theoretical part. However, in the multiverse, only the proud and aloof Giza race held the supreme secret of Shin'ik power. Although there were a few handwritten copies from the Giza people in the laboratory of the Unto Empire, their research on Shin'ik theory was still in its infancy. However, the impatient upper echelons of the Empire had ordered them to conduct the Shin'ik experiments ahead of time. After a certain experiment, a swarm of Zergs that came out of nowhere attacked the laboratory, and most of the people became infected by the violent Zerg. The Dawn they were on had activated the self-destruct sequence immediately after the invasion of the Zerg swarm. It was under such circumstances that the narrator wrote his final words. Yanai from Group 3 was also infected. She treated me to Pettigrew biscuits and took care of me several times at work, but I couldn't confess my feelings to her until the end. Looking at her twisted and crazy face across the glass, my heart ached for a long time until I saw her husband's infected body. Everyone is dead. I locked myself in the cold storage. I would rather freeze to death than become a zombie-like thing, but the cold air soon disappeared. I soon realized that someone had cut off the power supply, but who could have done it? A ghost. I don't know. I don't want to think about it either. I want to save myself. But I'm on a fucking starship that's wandering outside the Empire's territory. No one can save me. If I had known that the apocalypse would come so suddenly, I wouldn't have pretended to reject Baz when he invited me to a striptease show. F***ck. I suddenly remembered my childhood dream of sleeping with a large number of women of different races. How did I end up as a mediocre researcher? This is so sad. The above was the second to last page of the notebook. The last page of the book made one's heart tremble. I have a woman now, ha ha ha. She is very voluptuous and beautiful. Her charm is not inferior to Yanai's. The key was that it felt very comfortable to be with her. For her, I should pull myself together. We will definitely be able to escape and be together forever. This is my promise. My queen. The notebook stopped abruptly. Matthew's heart was creeped out. At the last moment of his life, was this researcher hallucinating, or did something shocking happen? Matthew did not know. He only knew that the other party would not be able to escape the fate of being infected. So, the Dawn is a starship. After becoming a hive, the starship crashed here for various reasons. Ella had mentioned that the Zerg nest was part of the Moonlight Woodland, the material plane, and other worlds. From this point of view, perhaps the swarm of Zergs had chosen this place as their landing point due to their consciousness. At this cross-section of many worlds, it was more convenient to infiltrate many worlds at the same time. Matthew thought calmly. Combining the knowledge he had learned in his previous life, he silently raised the difficulty level of this hive in his heart. The instance dungeons created by the Unto Empire were definitely not that simple. According to Ella, the Zerg Guard was the strongest unit of the Zerg. However, Matthew was sure that there were more dangerous creatures hidden below. Creatures like the Zerg Queen or King. After all, the Unto Empire is famous for her hubris. Originally, it was prosperous enough to dominate an entire universe, but it set up thousands of laboratories and recruited a bunch of monsters, eventually causing the complete destruction of its own universe. Matthew shook his head helplessly. He put away the researcher's notes. At this moment, the skeleton soldiers had already piled up all the infected bodies together. Buzz. 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 Matthew sprinkled a handful of fiery dragon oil from afar. A small flame lit up. The pile of corpses started burning intensely. In less than 10 seconds, the infected and the larvae were burned clean. The flames dissipated. Only black marks were left on the ground. It burns fast and takes only a short time. The arsonist's fiery dragon oil is indeed a necessary tool for burning corpses and destroying evidence. Matthew praised in his heart. What was even more amazing was that the fiery dragon oil only left behind bones. As long as he needed it, he could summon more skeleton soldiers at any time. Matthew led the group forward. The area in front of them was empty. It was obvious that someone had swept through it. At the fork in the road, Ella rubbed her sleepy eyes and said, "These 3 paths all lead to the 5th floor. The only difference is the different entrances. However, you have to take note that below the 5th floor is the activity space of the violent Zerg guards. They are very terrifying and are not comparable to ordinary infected entities." Matthew nodded. If it was before, he might have chosen to move forward boldly. However, since he knew that this was the Unto Empire's doing, he would not charge forward blindly. The left and right roads have already been taken. It should be Samantha's doing. With her and Eli's combat power, it shouldn't be a problem to clear the local infected, but they won't have an easy time as I do. With that in mind, Matthew decided to take the middle path. Before entering the 5th level, he had to clear all the Zergs in his way. However, before he could give the order to the skeleton soldiers, intense footsteps suddenly came from the next tunnel. A yellow and black phantom jumped out of the tunnel. The moment she bumped into Matthew and the others, she cursed, "Damn it!" Matthew took a closer look. It was a leopard. The leopard's forelimbs touched the ground and then bounced up. It walked upright like a human. The spots and animal skin instantly faded, revealing a beautiful figure. "Return to where you came from immediately. I'll try to buy you some time. Remember, Don't look back. They're here for me, but if you're discovered, I'm afraid you won't be able to escape. Samantha said hurriedly and crouched down on the ground. She didn't move, but in the blink of an eye, a lifelike leopard appeared in front of everyone. Samantha? What happened? Ella was shocked. It's the Zerg guards. I don't know why, but those Zerg guards actually left their territory to ambush me today. I almost fell for it. Hurry up and stop asking. The leopard shouted angrily. Then, without looking back, she ran back into the tunnel. Deep in the tunnel, all kinds of strange roars could be heard. Matthew, we have to help. Before Ella could finish, Matthew transformed into a raven and flew up to the top of the cave. Wait for me. Ella followed in panic. However, Matthew did not fly far. He only found a high platform where he could stand and observe the situation while deploying his skeleton soldiers. Fierce fighting sounds came from the tunnel. The leopard's figure appeared again. There were 3 bloody wounds on her body, one of which had worms crawling on it. Ella, why haven't you left yet? The leopard saw the owl in the stands and was shocked and angry. The skeleton soldiers move very slowly. I'm afraid we won't be able to outrun the enemy. I want to know how many Zerg guards are chasing after you, Matthew said. Samantha was stunned when she heard Matthew's voice. Before she could respond, a large group of people rushed out of the tunnel. Ella could not help but scream. Matthew was also shocked by the ugly appearance of the monster at the front. What kind of monster was that? It was like a monster made of countless human legs and bodies, but the joints were not sewn carefully. The iron wires barely held the joints together, and the Zerg larva crawled out one by one. Its skin was purple-red, and its speed was extremely fast. Wherever it passed by, there would be a large pool of yellow-green mucus on the ground, making people feel extremely nauseous. Violent Zerg guard, LV-10. And behind this monster were more than a dozen infected ones. This number had indeed exceeded the limit that the skeleton squad could handle under normal circumstances. Go. I'll stall for time. Eli will be here soon. Don't worry about me. Samantha shouted. As she spoke, she growled at the guard. After successfully attracting the other party's attention, she went around the terrain and played hide-and-seek with the other party. The skeleton soldiers were engaged in a battle with the infected. The scene was extremely chaotic. However, in this situation, the lack of individual strength of the skeleton soldiers was magnified infinitely. In less than half a minute, 3 skeleton soldiers were suppressed by the infected in a one-on-one battle. Beep beep beep. More footsteps came from the tunnel. The second violent Zerg guard quickly appeared in front of everyone. Unlike the first violent Zerg guard, which was almost entirely made up of human thighs, this violent Zerg guard had countless arms. They looked extremely evil. Soldier! Matthew shouted. In the shadows, a skeleton that was moving forward while twisting its hips suddenly attacked. Like a ghost, he appeared behind the second guard, and the short sword in his hand slashed out like a storm. In the blink of an eye, he had cut off all the stitches on the guard's body. The monster actually turned into a pile of minced meat on the spot. Hundreds of larvae jumped out. They shouted and pounced on the skeleton soldiers and Samantha. Very quickly, the space became too small for the leopard to bounce around. She was careless, and several wounds appeared on Samantha's body. Samantha, get over here. Matthew's voice came from the high platform. She glanced at Matthew. Matthew had returned to his human form and was holding a shiny magic book in his hand. She hesitated for a moment, and finally, under Ella's loud persuasion and the effect of the divine badge on Matthew's chest, she approached him at an extremely fast speed. 10 steps behind her, there were 2 infected ones chasing after her. You'd better have a way to escape. Otherwise, I can only take Ella away, the female druid said quickly. Matthew did not answer. He lifted the book slightly and started chanting. A group of mysterious magic words floated in the air. The two infected ones charged at them, but they seemed to have hit a wall, and their heads were bleeding. Not only that, but their bodies also began to weaken rapidly, as if a force was sapping their vitality. Defensive Psalm, you have cast the spell's rune of guard and protection from good and evil. Protective spell? Aren't you a necromancer? Samantha was surprised. Of course, I'm a bona fide necromancer. Matthew smiled. And you'll soon know why people say that you should never assume you have a numbers advantage against a necromancer. Matthew suddenly let out a sharp syllable. In the chaotic battle, a lotus-like grey fog suddenly bloomed from the body of a skeleton soldier that was about to fall. A large amount of negative energy poured out. There was a loud bang. The skeleton soldier exploded. It directly killed several infected ones and even more larvae around it. The real explosion had just begun. You have used the spell Last Dance on Skeleton Soldier No. 9. You have started using consecutive corpse explosion. Chapter 31. Chinook Staff. Corpse Explosion. Necromancer's signature spell, one could learn it as long as one reached level 4. The principle was to use mental strength and mana to pry the negative energy from the newly dead body, causing it to explode due to energy imbalance. Therefore, the first requirement for corpse explosion was a corpse that had been dead for no more than 5 minutes. Fresh bodies teetered on the balance of life and death. That was why a small imbalance in the energy could release such a shocking explosive force. When a necromancer who was proficient in corpse explosion reached the second rank, he had the opportunity to learn an advanced spell called Corpse Explosion Chain. This skill could give corpse explosion a powerful buff. The corpse of a creature killed by corpse explosion would have a 50% chance of automatically creating another corpse explosion. Matthew had mastered this technique a year ago. Each of the violent Zerg infected ones and violent Zerg guards was infested with countless violent Zerg larvae. In terms of chaining corpse explosion, these larvae perfectly played the role of connectors. The damage of a single corpse explosion wasn't great, but the health points of the Zerg larvae were even lower. They were almost instantly killed. And each larva would be treated as a single unit to increase the probability of a chain corpse explosion greatly. That's why, after the first explosion sounded from the damp and dark cave, the continuous explosions sounded like firecrackers during the spring festival in Matthew's previous life. The haze of negative energy continued to rise from the cave. They looked like little mushroom clouds. The high-intensity chain explosions also inevitably caused abnormal airflow in the cave. Even though the three of them were within the protective spell, they could feel the wind whistling past them. Ella staggered. If Matthew hadn't reacted quickly and grabbed her, she was almost swept away. The serial corpse explosions caused the stone wall to collapse. For a moment, a strong wind blew, and white smoke billowed. A large number of Zergs died in the explosion. In the midst of the chaos, Samantha saw the arrogant guard who had ambushed and chased her. It originally wanted to rely on its thick skin to pass through the area with the most intense explosion. However, a series of mournful wails followed. Its bloated and huge body fell down uncontrollably. In the purgatory of negative energy woven by white bones and grey fog, the Zerg guard had also contributed its body to the corpse explosion feast. Boom! The huge body exploded. All the creatures within 20 meters of it were blasted into pieces. Matthew estimated that after the big guy exploded, the number of Zergs present had already decreased by more than half. However, the corpse explosion continued. Slowly, the loud explosion chain turned into occasional explosions. 20 minutes later, Matthew used the arcane missile that came with his charged staff to deal with the stragglers that escaped the explosion. The terrifying corpse explosion finally stopped. The wind slowed down slightly, and the white smoke sank. The three of them walked out of the range of the gradually dimming rune of guard. In front of them was a mess. A large amount of debris was mixed together. Minced meat, broken bones, eyeballs, nails, hair, fascia, internal organs, stones, gold coins, clothes. A large amount of blood and pus sprayed on the stone walls in all directions. The air was filled with a nauseating smell. Even with Matthew's mental fortitude, he almost couldn't resist the urge to retch. Ella flew away without a sound. Samantha, on the other hand. Perhaps it was because she often fought with the Zergs. Her resistance to such bloody scenes was obviously stronger. She walked around the scene of the corpse explosion with a calm expression, checking to see if there were any stragglers left. Only when she saw the parts left behind by the Zerg guards did she slightly frown. On the other side of the battlefield, Matthew met up with Soldier and counted the few spoils of war and losses. In terms of losses, except for Soldier, all 11 skeleton soldiers became triggers for the explosion. This was what Matthew had accumulated in Rolling Stone Town for a long time. It was impossible to say that he did not feel heartache, but skeleton soldiers were essentially cannon fodder. There weren't many spoils of war either. There weren't many good items on the Zerg race, and they were bombarded repeatedly by the corpse explosion spell indiscriminately. The items that survived the explosions were of high quality. Matthew found a sapphire ring, a card that looked like an access card, and a Chinook staff the length of an arm. The sapphire ring was not only beautiful but it was also enchanted with a spiderweb spell. Unfortunately, it was not of a high grade and could only be cast once a day. There was no clue as to the origin of the card, but Matthew noticed that the emblem of the Unto Empire was engraved on the lower right corner of one of the cards. This could be a certificate to enter an important laboratory. As for the last Chinook staff, because it was in an unappraised state, Matthew habitually activated an identification skill on it after he obtained it. Appraisal failed. You are unable to learn the attributes and usage of the Chinook staff. Hint, you need higher knowledge, sigh. I failed. Matthew raised his eyebrows, and then he felt a headache. Most items related to Chinook power could only be used after being appraised. In order to appraise such items, the user of the identification skill had to have a high level of Chinook knowledge. However, Chinook knowledge usually came from items related to Chinook power. It could be said to be a perfect closed loop. However, Matthew was not discouraged. He still had an advanced identification scroll gifted by Master Ronan at home, which should be able to identify the staff. The only thing he needed to consider was whether the staff was worthy of the advanced identification scroll. Matthew gently stroked the amber stone embellished with light blue on the Chinook staff. For a moment, he could not make up his mind. What an impressive explosion! Your strength has exceeded my expectations. To be honest, you've helped me a lot. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken me a lot of effort to get away. Samantha's voice sounded. Matthew put away his staff and said calmly, "This is nothing. They are also my targets." Samantha stared at Matthew with her bright eyes. "But I made you lose a team of skeleton soldiers. I owe you this." Matthew waved his hand. "It's just a team of skeleton soldiers. Don't worry about it. No, this is very important. I'm thinking of a way to make it up to you." Samantha's eyes were bright. "Or you can try to make some requests, but I might not be able to satisfy all of them." Matthew thought about it. "Maybe we can work together? This hive is huge, and we haven't even explored a third of its surface. As moonwalkers, we have the same goal." Samantha shook her head without hesitation. "No, I won't cooperate with you." Before Matthew could say anything, she spoke first. "How about this? I might not be able to accept your request, so I've decided to return a team of skeleton soldiers to you. Eli and I killed a lot of infected people, and their bodies were buried in specific locations on each floor after being processed. I think those materials should be enough for you." That was fine too. Matthew was not unhappy about being rejected. He looked at Samantha curiously and asked, "Why did you reject me?" "Just because I'm a necromancer." Samantha said honestly, "I'm sorry, but I really don't want to work with a necromancer. It goes against my nature." Matthew couldn't help but laugh. "Are nature souls also narrow-minded?" Samantha was stunned. "What right do you have to expel the undead from nature?" Matthew asked righteously. "Can't undead creatures be a part of nature? Is your understanding of nature a concept instilled into you by those conservative and backward existences who hold power? If that's the case, then I really don't want to cooperate with you. Your understanding of nature is too shallow." "What? What are you talking about?" Samantha asked in shock. "How could Her Highness the Goddess allow you to say such blasphemous words?" Blasphemy? Was this level of challenge considered blasphemy? Matthew now had a new understanding of the Moonwalker's mind. Matthew didn't care if the goddess of the moonlight would punish him or not. Not to mention that she had a favor to ask of him, even without the pressure of the violent Zerg, it was uncertain whether she had the ability to punish him or not. After all, according to the information he had learned from Master Ronan, it had been hundreds of years since the famous event, the ascension of the Heavenly Family Palace. The influence of the gods on the material plane could be said to be negligible. Not to mention the human countries, even the elves who were relatively devout in their beliefs, had already gone against the will of the gods. Only conservative and backward groups like the Druids still maintained a relatively fixed belief. "Since there's no room for cooperation, I'll leave first." Matthew yawned and prepared to go home. "Remember to bring me to the skeleton material the next time we meet. Finally, let me share my own understanding. For me, nature is all-inclusive. It doesn't only include the narrow embodiment that humans can see but also the truth of the universe." Samantha stared at Matthew, her expression changing. Matthew didn't say anything else and disappeared. Samantha did not leave. She paced back and forth. Her gaze was erratic. Footsteps came from the cave behind her. "Sorry, I'm late. Did something happen here?" Eli asked apologetically. Samantha hesitated for a moment and repeated Matthew's words. After hearing this, Eli was furious. Not only is he blaspheming God, but he is also blaspheming nature. How could dirty undead creatures be considered a part of nature? He's just waxing tales. And he's just a mere second-rank necromancer. How can he have the cheek to talk about the universe? If he were in our Earth society, a person like him would have been robbed of everything and exiled to the underground of the Far East. Eli cursed at him fiercely. Samantha was surprisingly silent. Eli's heart skipped a beat. "Samantha, don't tell me you believe his nonsense." Samantha hurriedly shook her head. "How is that possible? I'm just thinking about how to repay him. After all, he saved my life just now." Eli heaved a sigh of relief and nodded. "If he really saved your life, then we should have done something to repay him. I have some leftovers. You can give them to him as compensation." "Then," he said in a reproachful tone, "next time when I'm not around, don't take risks alone." Samantha replied casually, "Got it?" Eli asked excitedly, "Then let's continue." Samantha hesitated for a moment, then bit her lip and said, "No, I'm injured and a little tired. I'll call it a night. See you next time, Eli." With that, she disappeared. Only Eli was left standing there, confused. At home in Rolling Stone Town. Hint, you have consumed an advanced identification scroll. Appraisal was successful. You have obtained Koff Staff, Shinik item. Chapter 32. Domain, Temperance. Description: when the wand is fully charged, it can instantly cause up to 3 targets to fall into a violent coughing state. Note, when coughing, the target's focus will be reduced by at least 10 points. If the coughing target was located in a crowd, it could quickly cause a small-scale infection. The duration of coughing depended on the target's level and immunity. You cannot make legendary, undead, and mechanical units cough. This staff can ignore all defensive spells below legendary. There is a certain chance that the coughing state will be dispelled by a high-level priest. A small divine artifact. When he saw the explanation, he was stunned. Matthew knew that his usage of the advanced identification scroll was worth it. This thing is simply the bane of spellcasters. He fondly caressed the smooth side of the staff. Focus was the most important attribute of spellcasting. If one did not focus enough, it was very likely that the spellcasting would fail, and the consequences of the failure were often extremely tragic. Imagine this. A high-level mage who had carefully set up a defense was passionately chanting a high-level spell that could turn the tide of the battle. Suddenly, his throat felt itchy, and his eyes rolled back. The spell stuck and turned into a cough. Then, what happened next? While his focus was being cut off, he still had to endure the terrifying spell backlash. Mages and warlocks were not the only ones who could be affected by this wand. It could also interrupt druids, shamans, and bards' spellcasting. One step further. Rogues, who needed high-precision movements to maintain their threat in battle, would also suffer setbacks. High-level warriors, monks, sword saints, and other resistant monsters could probably cough while hacking at people. The others would be affected to varying degrees. As for the priest, in this era where the gods are far away, it's not that easy to meet a priest. No wonder the Unto Empire is so crazy. Chinook energy does have its merits. Matthew held the Chinook staff tightly in his hand. After a moment of excitement, he frowned slightly. Because in the next line of the description, there was another sentence. Staff charging method unknown, insufficient Chinook knowledge. Even an advanced identification scroll could not figure out its full appearance, which showed how rare Chinook knowledge was. However, Matthew was not in a hurry. This scroll had already helped him determine the direction of the information search. Next, he just needed to find a way to collect knowledge, such as the charging method of Chinook items. It seems that I have to find time to visit the Crucible House and find the Tower Spirit, who is extremely lacking in love, to inquire about Master Ronan's recent situation. Matthew put away the Chinook staff properly. Then, according to the usual practice, he began to review tonight's encounter. In a situation where I suddenly encounter a large number of enemies, it's not a problem to abandon the ordinary skeleton soldiers. However, I could still do better in terms of distance control. My clothes were already stained with blood. If I asked Peggy to wash my clothes later, she would nag at me again. This was very embarrassing. The defensive spell in the defensive psalm is indeed impressive. The second-tier infected body can't go through the shield at all, but it can probably take a few hits from the third-tier violent Zerg guard. There were still some blank pages at the back of the spell book, which seemed to be able to be filled with some other defensive spells. However, such spells were usually for one-time use only. I wonder how much a mage who specializes in defensive magic will charge to imbue the pages of the spell book. The existence of the Unto Empire proves that I have indeed come to a world with a game-like worldview. Chinook items are very powerful, but I can't have too many greedy thoughts. I should first do my old job well and study other things when I have the strength. I'll set a small goal first. I'll expand the oak forest to about 1,800 trees before summer comes. The tip of the quill dipped in mineral ink flew across the cheap papyrus. Writing manuscripts was a small habit that Matthew had developed since he transmigrated. At first, he only recorded the difficulties of planting trees and some esoteric knowledge. Later, he would also use them to vent his longing for his hometown and record some thoughtful content. Anyway, he used Chinese characters, and his handwriting was so illegible that only he could barely recognize it. He saw this as a unique way to relieve stress. During this period of time, Matthew's brain was often alternating between extreme emptiness and high-speed operation. Swoosh. 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 The pleasant sound of writing rang out. Matthew quickly wrote the last paragraph. As for what I said before I left, I hope it left an impression on Samantha. Maybe, she will be my first experimental subject to explore my unique path of legend. Perhaps Eli has potential too. However, I still have to be careful not to hurt them. Although these two druids are old-fashioned, they are very kind and upright. Undying and nature. This was the question that Matthew had been thinking about ever since he transmigrated. He knew very well that these two seemingly different paths would be the source of his future power. Based on the world's knowledge, the two paths were almost completely opposite. People did not even want to think about why they were opposite, as if it was a natural law. Matthew had once asked Master Ronan this question. The latter pondered for a long time before giving Matthew an answer. Ronan told him that all the concepts that were currently used on the continent could not be separated from the interpretation of the world by the gods of the Age of Enlightenment. Chapter 33. In the era when the gods rose up and interfered with the human world with their own power, in order to consolidate their absolute authority in their own domain, they formed a set of explanations for the world and concepts under the tacit understanding and compromise of many parties. This was the worldview inherited by many races on the continent. This concept had lasted for too long. As a result, no one was willing to break it for hundreds of years after the gods left. For mages, spells are low-level tools, domains are middle-level tools, and concepts are high-level tools. But to the gods of the heavenly family palace, the concept was their life. For example, in the Age of Enlightenment, if one day all living beings believed that what rose at night was no longer the moon, then the next day, all the gods related to the moon were at risk of falling. Of course, the situation was very different after the ascension of the heavenly family palace. The gods were powerless to interfere with the present world. Concepts were still a source of power for them, but concepts were no longer fatal. More importantly, they became too weak. This is why we can sit here and discuss concepts without considering the feelings of the gods. In fact, they were a bunch of pitiable worms that had been swept into the trash heap, destined to never shine again in this world. After their ascension, it was the era of spellcasters. I admire your views on nature and immortality. If you embark on the path of legend one day, you might really have a chance to walk on a supreme path that no one has ever walked before. These were Ronan's original words. Matthew was deeply moved after hearing it. He was excited that the light shone on his previously lost path, but he was also glad that he met a good teacher like Ronan when he had just started. In Matthew's opinion, it was inevitable that the concept of undying and nature went hand in hand on his body. If he continued to use the existing concepts and worldview, then the two would inevitably conflict with each other. He even suspected that the chaotic characteristics of the system were a manifestation of conflict. To solve this problem, he had to come up with a new concept. And in this new concept system, he had to make the undying and nature mutually inclusive. This was theoretically possible. After all, the negative energy plane that symbolized the origin of the undead was naturally formed. It should belong to the broad sense of nature. As time passed, there would be a day when the world would be destroyed. When the universe was destroyed, it would return to death, and death was a subdomain of undying. The two could be mutually inclusive. With Matthew's current strength, it was still too early to talk about the concept. He had to grasp the power of undying and nature at least before he could announce the new concept to the world. But a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Persuading the most conservative druid to accept the possibility of the overlapping of undying and nature was Matthew's test after planting the tree. He finished writing. Matthew did not put away the stack of papyrus. He was just taking a short rest. Then, he continued to write. Next was the content of his future plan. Matthew liked to make plans regularly and list out the things that needed to be done one by one. The first was planting trees. Before summer arrived, this was Matthew's main business. No project could affect his continued effort in planting trees. For this reason, he decided to reduce the time he spent cleaning the zerg nest at night. After all, the lower he went, the more dangerous it would be. He had to ensure that there were no stragglers that escaped from the upper levels before he considered going to the next level. He believed that Ella and the goddess would understand. The second was the learning of spells and the advancement of his profession, which had been delayed for half a month. These two were actually not that urgent, not to mention the spells that could be learned at any time. Matthew's level was now stuck at level 8. If he wanted to continue to improve, he had to complete a ritual called Night of the Undead to obtain the qualification to advance to Advanced Necromancer. He could also go for other powerful or unorthodox advanced professions: the True Necromancer, the Lord of Paleness, the Lord of the Dead Souls, the Sigh of Ode, the Tomb Guard. There was also Bian City's characteristic Advanced Necromancer class, the Chained Death. In short, if he did not advance, his level could not continue to increase, and his experience could only be stored temporarily. However, advancement often required a lot of energy and time. After some thought, Matthew decided to plan for the advancement in the first week of summer. This meant that he still had enough time to think about which path to take. Lastly, he needed to add some necessary props and items. He wanted to buy scrolls. The weapon that soldier requested had to be forged by someone else. If he still had money left, Matthew wanted to exchange it for a bigger magical bag. Also, a long time ago, he had taken a fancy to a ring in the Crucible house that could increase his energy limit. However, he thought about it. He sighed. In the end, he crossed out the last two items from his to-do list. It was late at night when all the paperwork was completed. Matthew sorted the papyrus paper and pressed it with different weights. He had just stretched when a white light shone. A coconut fell into Matthew's arms. "Wait, where did you get this?" Matthew was surprised. Unfortunately, the oak tree fairy came and went quickly. He only saw a flash of white light, and the other party disappeared, leaving Matthew alone to enjoy this gift of nature. Chapter 34. How do I crack open this thing? Matthew touched the thick coconut shell with both hands, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. His attention shifted from the coconut to the ability gift of nature. He pondered for a moment. Matthew placed the coconut on his thigh, took out another piece of paper, and wrote, "How should I use this miraculous and strange ability?" He stopped writing and thought for a moment. If he were a greedy person, he would strive to maximize his benefits. He would collect corpses through all sorts of legal or illegal channels and then bury them in his oak forest. After that, he only needed to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. But was that really right? Matthew shook his head decisively. Boundless gifts seemed tempting, but if he did that, what difference would it make him from those people who did all kinds of evil for power? Besides, there might be hidden dangers to this ability that he had not discovered. Matthew didn't think that he could always enjoy the gifts without paying any price. His intuition told him that abusing this ability could cause a lot of problems. Therefore, he had to be cautious. Matthew decided to take the initiative to control the number of gifts. He wouldn't refuse a corpse that was delivered to him, but he wouldn't take the initiative to search for a burial object either. In addition, I should also control my thoughts in terms of perception. I can't think of burying someone when I see that they have powerful abilities. This kind of greedy thinking is very dangerous. It might gradually strip away my humanity. Nature's gift is a gift, and I shouldn't take the initiative to demand or expect it. He wrote these. At that moment, it was as if something hazy in his heart had been broken. His heart was clear and refreshed. He suddenly noticed that everything around him had fallen into a strange distortion. In a trance. Matthew saw countless faces that seemed to be immersed in mercury. Some of them were happy, some were sad, some were greedy, and some were cold. It was as if there were pairs of eyes with different emotions watching him. His skin was itchy from the gazes. Just as Matthew was about to give in, all the images disappeared. Powerful energy was injected into his body. You have firmly rejected an incredible temptation in the depths of your heart. You have successfully stepped into the subdomain of desire, temperance. As a reward for stepping into the field, you can choose one of the following 3 abilities. 1 Heart of Tranquil Water, your willpower is enough to resist most charms below legendary level. 2 Spare Power, after your mana or stamina is completely exhausted, a small portion of energy will be replenished. Amount of usage, 10. 3 A Heart Without Regrets, you can choose whether to seal the emotion regret. After sealing it, you will never be disturbed by this emotion. After the unexpected joy, Matthew began to think. These 3 options actually had their own merits. A heart without regrets could help a person permanently remove a relatively negative emotion, and it could also be unsealed at any time. It was flexible and easy to use. There was a limit to the number of times he could use spare power, but it could always help him in a desperate situation. Who could refuse the Heart of Tranquil Water? Out of courtesy, Matthew glanced at the other 2 options and chose one without hesitation. You have completed the enlightenment of the temperance subdomain. Your current status, initial entry. You have received a permanent status of clear mind. Clear mind, every day, as long as you complete the restraint of a certain desire, you will have a clear mind for at least 1 hour. In this state, your learning efficiency will be 3 times that of usual. This is very useful. If we're talking about desire, I am already restraining it every day. Matthew couldn't help but mutter. A faint voice came from outside the basement. I knew it. Matthew, I knew that you were actually restraining the urge to violate me every day. You necromancers are all the same, aren't you? Matthew turned around. Peggy was swinging her long legs against the doorframe. As she was doing that, she was still winking at Matthew. This scene. Matthew could only say in his heart, what in the... What's the matter, he asked. There are 3 big things I'm about to tell you. Peggy became serious. Chapter 35. Matthew's living room. First, when I visited our neighbor's house in the middle of the night, I happened to see the Lord's guards leaving through the eastern gate of the Mage District. They were fully armed, and there were about 20 of them. I'm guessing that they weren't there for a walk. Peggy said. The Lord's guards were the absolute elites of the Suki family. They were independent of the garrison and only listened to Rigger's orders. Most of the time, they would not leave the camp next to the Liege's residence. Only during wars or rebellions could they be seen in other parts of the town. Rigger has been keeping quiet for half a month. It seems like he's making a big move. Matthew gently kneaded the feathers at the end of the quill, and his eyes gradually became clear. It should be about the traitor. Peggy shrugged. I don't know about that. I'm just sharing interesting or suspicious signs with you, as you asked. But if your judgment is correct, then the traitor is probably not a small figure. It is very likely that he is a knight with a fief. Otherwise, Rigger would not need so many people. Matthew nodded in agreement. Although this matter is important, it has nothing to do with us. The next item is especially important. Peggy stared at Matthew seriously and said word by word, Matthew, you need to get back to work. Matthew was shocked. We don't have enough money anymore. Peggy threw a stack of bills and an account book on the table. There were all kinds of items and numbers written on them, and Matthew was dazzled. This is the account book for the last quarter and the budget for the next quarter that I just prepared. Let's talk about income first. You went out a few times recently and brought back some one-time income. These gold coins are about 700. And ever since you took a leave of absence from the Cipher Public School, Headmaster Ryan has stopped your double salary. Relying solely on the allowance from the Public Security Bureau, your monthly income is only 50 gold coins. Remember these numbers, and let's talk about expenses. In terms of food and accommodation, you have very high requirements for 3 meals a day. I prepare a variety of food for you every day, but many of the ingredients themselves are very expensive. Fortunately, the fairies would send some fresh vegetables and delicacies over every now and then. But even so, we still have to spend a lot of money in a month. Here, it's very clear. Your food expenditure is about 5 gold coins per month, and I need to buy negative energy stones to maintain my life and physical strength. Recently, I've been deliberately reducing my consumption, but it still costs around 25 gold coins per month. Look, our monthly food expenses actually cost 30 gold coins. Peggy growled and said, "This is too extravagant." Matthew pinched the bridge of his nose. It is indeed extravagant. However, the biggest expenditure is still in the greenhouse. In order to ripen a large number of seeds at the same time and cultivate them into saplings, you need to open the growth circle in the greenhouse at all times. This requires a large amount of silver powder and sunstones, and the monthly expenditure is more than 100 gold coins. This did not include the cost of buying seeds. Next, you would buy a full set of attribute enhancement scrolls. Even if that feminine mage in Bian City is willing to give you a discount, a set will cost you 200 gold coins. I also know that you want to buy a new magic book, a new magical bag, and that ring that increases the maximum limit of your energy. However, if this continues, your savings will be exhausted within 7 months. We'll go bankrupt then. Matthew. Peggy looked very nervous and didn't feel safe at all. Matthew thought for a moment. I've also calculated the expenditure. There's one thing you might not have noticed. The main factor that caused the expenditure gap is actually the greenhouse. After this spring, I'll greatly reduce the consumption of the greenhouse. But that's still not enough, is it? Peggy stared at him, then covered her jaw with one hand and said rather exaggeratedly, "Matthew, why don't you let me go back to the negative energy plane? I don't need extra negative energy stones to survive there. Although I don't like that place, at least it can lighten your burden." Matthew looked at her speechlessly. "Or you can go back to class. You are an excellent history teacher." Peggy tried to persuade him with reason and emotion. "However, the salary given to me by the public school is only 60 gold coins a month. If we follow your calculation, we will still be unable to make ends meet." Matthew spread out his hands, indicating that he was a lazy bones who did not want to go to work. "No, as far as I know, as long as you are willing to go back to class, your salary will increase to 100 gold coins a month." Peggy's plan was revealed. "So, go back to class, Matthew. This family needs your income. The girls in school are also waiting for you to come back. Did you take Principal Ryan's money?" Peggy confessed. "Actually, this is also the third thing I want to talk about. Miss Sif came by today and said that she had something to talk to you about. I told her that you weren't here, so she planned to wait for you in the living room. I told her that you might not come back tonight. She looked a little disappointed. After sitting in the kitchen for about an hour, she left with some regret. However, she told me that she would visit you again tomorrow at the same time." Matthew rubbed his temples. "Did you say no?" Peggy glanced at him. "I said yes." Chapter 36. "Why?" Matthew asked. Paige crossed her arms. "Because that girl was very cute. She chatted with me for more than an hour in the kitchen and even asked me what dishes you liked. She promised me that when she came tomorrow, she would bring me the purgatory recipes hidden in her house. As a skeleton who aspires to become a top chef, of course, I couldn't refuse." Matthew was amused. So that's why you're urging me to go to work. Was it Sif's idea? Also, is this the big thing you mentioned? Peggy said matter-of-factly, going to work on time is a virtue, Matthew. Besides, this concerns my dream and your happiness. Why isn't it important? I want to remind you that Sif is different from other girls. Her mind is much more mature than you think of underage girls. I think she suits you very well. Matthew spread his hands and joked, unfortunately, her father does not suit me. I thought so too, Peggy said seriously. So I gave her a suggestion. I told her to get rid of her father, who likes to follow his daughter when she comes to find you tomorrow. Matthew scratched his head. So Rieger was following Sif again? Didn't he have his own work to do? Who knows? Peggy said. He's a pitiful person, but this kind of oppressive protection may not give Sif happiness. He should learn to let her grow up on her own. You look like you have a lot of experience with children, Matthew teased. Peggy was stunned for a moment. Her soul fire flickered again, and she didn't speak for a long time. New memories. Matthew lowered his voice. No, Peggy shook her head. But I think I heard the sentence from another person. I don't know if you've had a similar experience. A moment, a sentence, that strong feeling of déjà vu, as if you've experienced it before. The two of them were silent for a while. So, are you going back to class or not? Peggy asked suddenly. Matthew blinked. The reason why I was willing to go to class was partly because I lacked money. On the other hand, I hope to use the school library and the students' books at home to catch up on knowledge. Now that I don't need that anymore, I suggest you forget the previous suggestion. He paused for a moment and thought, but I really should find myself a legal, stable, and quick job. What do you think about that, Peggy? Peggy yawned and looked disinterested. How would I know? I'm just a muddle-headed skeleton. Good night, Matthew. The next night, Matthew, who had been busy in the forest for the whole day, returned to his home in town early. After dinner, he took a shower and waited in the living room with a book. Although the content of the book wasn't boring, Matthew was a little distracted. He was mainly thinking about how to tactfully persuade Sif not to come to him every few days. He had a good impression of Sif. Therefore, he did not want to hurt her even more. 7 p.m. It was almost time for Sif's visit. A bell rang outside the house. Matthew put down his book and quickly got up to open the door. However, what he did not expect was, it was another woman standing outside the fence. Samantha. Matthew looked at her in surprise. Please forgive me for coming in uninvited, and please don't blame Ella. I was the one who begged her to tell me your address. Samantha looked a little tired. However, there was a strange look in her eyes. At this moment, she was wearing a dress that was in line with the trend of human towns, but it did not fit her well. Her chest swelled and trembled slightly. Her expression was a little awkward. I'm not used to places where humans gather. Can you let me in? Samantha asked in a low voice. Of course. However, before Matthew could open the door to welcome her in, not far away, a mournful roar erupted. No. The man roared as he walked closer. Samantha, what are you doing? Why did you go to this necromancer's house? Matthew silently watched the menacing Eli. Look, he looked at Samantha again. The uneasiness on the female druid's face instantly disappeared, replaced by anger and fierceness. Eli, I'm warning you. Do not follow me. Samantha's voice was like a beast's roar, making one's heart palpitate. She turned around and stomped towards Eli. Every step she took, her body expanded. 3 steps later, a beautiful and flawless brown fur draped over her body. She had transformed from a 1.7 meter tall human woman into a brown bear that was more than 3 meters tall. Please wait a moment, Mr. Matthew. Samantha turned around and said in a gentle and apologetic tone. You've never used that tone with me. Eli was still angrily accusing her. The giant bear pounced forward and grabbed Eli's body. It was as if she was dragging a log as she rushed out of the town. In the blink of an eye, the two figures disappeared one after another. Only a shallow mark was left on the cobblestone floor. A black shadow appeared at the end of the mark. It was a leopard. She lightly jumped in front of Matthew. I'm sorry, but Eli won't bother us anymore. Chapter 37. Matthew thought for a moment and didn't say anything in the end. He politely led Samantha into the living room. Peggy, we have guests. Peggy reluctantly came out of the kitchen. She glanced at Samantha and snorted again. Then, she turned around and brought a cup of cold coffee from the kitchen. The bell rang again. Sorry, excuse me. Matthew had to open the door first. This time, it was indeed Sif standing outside the fence. She was no longer wearing the dark red cloak but a white dress. She was tall and had long legs. Her legs were close together, and her hands were behind her back. Her smile was sweet and gave people a feeling of healing. Good evening, Matthew. Sif smiled and greeted him. Matthew smiled back. Good evening. Well, please come in first. As he spoke, he moved to the side. Sif took half a step forward. During this process, she suddenly turned around and looked at the alley opposite her with a helpless expression. Wait for me, Matthew. She jogged over. In the shadows of the alley, Sif poked a section of the wall, and a red blanket appeared on the wall. The blanket fell, and an embarrassed middle-aged man appeared in front of her. Father, you promised not to interfere with my freedom, said Sif angrily. Rieger's face turned red, and he quickly retorted, but you also promised me that you would pay attention to your own safety. Sif's eyes widened. But I'm going to Matthew's house. It's not a dangerous place. Rieger's face was bitter. To him, that was probably the most dangerous place in Rolling Stone Town. But he didn't dare to say this to Sif. In the many arguments and conversations with his daughter, they did have an agreement. He was the first to violate the agreement. Therefore, he tried to coax Sif out of her unhappiness. I promise you, I will leave now. Rieger patted Sif's head reluctantly. Under the latter's gaze, he turned around and left the street. However, less than 5 minutes later, he turned around and sneaked into the shadows again. Detestable necromancer. Rieger gritted his teeth in hatred, but it was really inconvenient for him to do anything to Matthew. He watched Sif's back and Matthew's smiling face disappear behind the door, and the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. No. I can't just wait outside like this. I have to see what they are doing. The living room. They're in the living room. I have to find a place where I can look into the living room. Rieger's gaze frantically searched the surroundings. He found a red roof with a tall chimney. Rieger was agile and jumped up. He took 2 steps forward and revealed a happy expression. As expected, I can see Matthew's living room from here. However, the roof was tilted upward on both sides. If he wanted to see into Matthew's living room more clearly, he still had to go up. So he grabbed hold of the bricks and stepped forward. All the way to the roof. He bumped into a similarly sneaky and wild figure. That person's face was filled with unwillingness, and his eyes were fierce. When Rieger bumped into him, he was also staring at Matthew's living room. Rieger was stunned for a moment. Then, as if he had thought of something, he instantly became furious. He grabbed the wild man's shoulder and asked, "Did the despicable necromancer get your daughter too?" Chapter 38. Grabbed by Rieger, Eli instinctively wanted to counterattack, but he restrained himself at the critical moment. His intuition told him that the man in front of him did not seem to have any malicious intentions. He frowned and pondered the meaning of Rieger's question. Then, he shook his head and said, "No." Rieger was a little surprised. Matthew was well known for being liked by girls. He thought that, just like him, Eli was a family member of the victim girls. "I'm sorry." Realizing that he had lost his composure, Rieger let go of his hand and sighed. "I really envy you. You don't know how popular that necromancer is among the underage girls. If you have a daughter, please keep an eye on her, or you'll regret it." Eli's lips quivered slightly. "In the end," he said truthfully, "the one who just went in was my girlfriend." Rieger widened his eyes. The two men on the roof fell into a dead silence. In Matthew's living room, the atmosphere was also a little strange at first. When two young women with different figures and looks appeared in a sealed space, a few meaningful eye exchanges were inevitable. Sif smiled sweetly. "Matthew, do you have guests? You guys go ahead. I'll go to the kitchen with Peggy." She actually hooked her arm around Peggy's arm with incomparable ease. The two of them went to the kitchen affectionately. Laughter came from the kitchen. Samantha looked away and asked curiously, "Are all human girls so bold now?" Matthew shook his head and smiled. "Sif is an exception." He poured Samantha another glass of milk. "I came to look for you today because of what you said the other day." Samantha went straight to the point. "At first, I didn't think that what you said was right, but your words reminded me of the past. A friend." She took a sip of milk and pressed her lips together to wipe away the white foam. Her beautiful face revealed a deep reminiscence. "In fact, it has been a long time. There was someone who said something similar to me, but at that time, I was too young, and I lacked knowledge of this world. I thought about it carefully. Although you are a necromancer, you don't look like a bad person. That day in the hive, I saw you transform into a raven. That wasn't a mage's ability. That is the shape-shifting form that only druids have. No matter how bad the situation was, the goddess of moonlight would never give the title of moonwalker to someone who had nothing to do with druids. It was these thoughts that prompted me to look for you. I want to know if you can really master the abilities of both nature and immortality at the same time." Matthew smiled. "Sorry, this is my secret." Samantha blushed. She seemed a little uneasy. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry into your secrets. I just want to confirm one thing." Matthew crossed his hands and rested his chin on them. "Why don't we talk about your friend first? He's the biggest reason why you came to find me, isn't he?" He thought Samantha came to him because she was convinced by his wonderful debate. He did not expect that there was another reason. This made Matthew feel a little frustrated and curious. What kind of friend would make Samantha, an old-fashioned druid, dare to break through her shackles and come to him? Samantha was silent for a while. She then slowly said, "All right, about my friend, I have to start from my hometown. My hometown is a village by the sea. My parents and the other adults in the village make a living by fishing. I don't have many memories of that village. I don't know why, but I was 9 or 10 years old at that time, but my memories of my hometown are so vague. I only remember that one day, all the people in the village ran out to watch some festivities. My mother pulled me along. It was on a shoal with jagged reefs. We saw a huge, magnificent, majestic, and exquisite tower ship on the shore. No matter what words I used, I couldn't express the shock I felt when I saw that ship for the first time. It was like the armor of a god, making people feel awe when they saw it. On the ship, there was a flag with golden lines on it, and the patterns on it were also very beautiful. The villagers had never seen such a flag before. Many years later, I found it in Jade Court's library. That was the flag of the Sioux country." Samantha paused and stared at Matthew with a strange look. "Do you know about the Sioux country?" Matthew quickly understood the emotions in Samantha's eyes. That emotion was called anticipation. Sorry, I don't know. Matthew only felt that the term "so country" did not seem to conform to the common language habits of this continent. Samantha's eyes flashed with disappointment. Most of the people in Indor don't know much about so country. After I became a druid, I went crazy looking for traces of so country. I only know that the Su nation is on the other side of the endless ocean. If you depart from the Gem Coast, there are 3 ways to find that legendary country. If you headed north, you would cross the eternal icefield and the road of desolation. You would pass through the barren and dangerous Far East, and you would have a chance to reach the northern part of the Su country. Chapter 39. To the south, you had to go southeast after arriving at Serrated City. Along the way, you would cross Mount Doom, Voodoo Swamp, and Barbarian Tooth Peninsula. This way, they would have a chance to reach the south of the Su country. The last method was to cross the endless sea by boat. In short, that country was very distant, mysterious, rich, and powerful. Did you know? The leader of the Su country had a legendary profession called Emperor. They combined their own mana with the veins of the earth, and they could release invincible power with the rays of their hands. The Su people said that he was the embodiment of the true dragon. The emperor's wife usually received a legendary profession called Empress. Legend had it that she could communicate with the phoenix above the 9 heavens and also had powerful energy. The emperor, empress, and their officials guarded the land of the Su country. However, at the borders of the Su country, in the endless abyss, there were always demons eyeing them covetously. In order to resist these demons, the emperors of the past generations built a vast and magnificent magical wonder, the Great Wall. It was said that even the shortest part of the Great Wall was more than 300 meters. The emperor often went to the Great Wall to fight the demons in the abyss. The mages under his command were all powerful characters, and they also had a special advanced profession, the Great Wall Mage. It was said that Great Wall mages could use the power of the Great Wall to cast spells. 10 level 17 Great Wall mages working together could cast a large-scale destructive spell that was comparable to a legendary spell. Of course, the Empress also has her own group of mages, but their special advanced profession is called Jade Phoenix Mages. It is said that their power comes from the phoenix that signed a contract with the Empress. Samantha's eyes lit up as she recounted the story. Matthew listened quietly, but his heart was not calm. According to her description, why did this Su country seem so much like a magically modified ancient China? After Samantha finished speaking, Matthew said with a fascinated look, "That's an amazing country. So, did your friend tell you all that?" Samantha nodded. "I believe you've guessed it as well. My friend came from the tower ship. He told me that their ship encountered a sea monster in the deep sea. In order to avoid the pursuit of the sea monster, they had no choice but to change their direction. In the end, because the ship was too damaged, they were forced to dock." She suddenly laughed at herself. It might be my wishful thinking to say that we were friends. Perhaps in his eyes, I was just a little girl who loved to read stories. He was the captain's son and was 3 years older than me. Their ship had countless knacks, and every one of them was an eye-opener for me. He took me to his father's room to use the starry mirror, a mirror that could see very far away, and he told me how they fought monsters that were more than 300 meters long in the deep sea. These things were like a dream to me at that time. Matthew was moved. "Do you like him?" Samantha waved her hand. "That's just an unrealistic fantasy of a young girl. He and I played together for about 2 months. Then, one day, they left quietly, just like when they arrived. I only remember the night before he left. He came down from the ship and brought me a lot of snacks. He told me that they were going out to sea to find a secret treasure left behind by a legendary master of the Su country in the endless ocean. As long as they find that secret treasure, they can uncover a new path that will allow the mage to control the power of life and death at the same time. He said that he would come to me once he found the treasure trove and wanted to share it with me. One winter, the village was destroyed by bandits. I joined the Moonlight Society and became a druid. Of course, he did not return. Sometimes, I can't even be sure if that magnificent black ship is a dream I had when I was young. Samantha's eyes were filled with nostalgia. The living room was silent for a long time. So you came to me just to know if the secret treasure your friend mentioned exists? Matthew asked. Samantha nodded, then shook her head in pain. I'd rather it didn't exist. Otherwise, I'm afraid it'll be difficult for me to continue facing my faith. Matthew said seriously, your faith should be nature, not a god who holds a portion of nature's authority. He stood up and extended his hand to Samantha. Give me your hand. Samantha hesitated. Finally, she placed her hand on Matthew's palm. On the roof, Rhaegar only heard a brutal beast roar. A strong wind blew. The wild man rushed into Matthew's house at an astonishing speed. Let her go. Eli roared and wanted to break through the window. A mighty power spread out from Matthew's body. A warm breeze blew from all directions. The house seemed to disappear. In its place, it was a warm and friendly oak forest. Under an oak tree, Matthew and Samantha were standing with their palms against each other. As for Eli, his attack was interrupted by the power of the domain. He looked around in a daze. He let out a long and unbelievable roar. 5 seconds later, the oak forest twisted and disappeared. You have activated the oak domain. Druid Samantha has sensed the oak domain with your help. She will have the opportunity to understand the power of the domain. Chapter 40. Druid Eli has accidentally entered your oak tree domain. With his high talent, he will also have the opportunity to comprehend the power of this domain. Ah! Matthew turned to look at the window next to him in surprise. Outside the window, Eli's face was twisted. His eyes were filled with gratitude and pain. In short, it was very complicated. Eli. Samantha stomped her foot angrily. Eli pushed open the window and said through gritted teeth, "Let go of your hand first." Samantha ignored him and looked at Matthew. I didn't expect you to really control the power of life. However, you must not have shared the oak tree domain with me just to show off. What do you want me to do for you? Eli's eyelids twitched. However, under Samantha's murderous gaze, in the end, he shut his mouth. So country. Matthew pulled out his hand. I want to know everything about the Sioux country. If possible, I also want the information about the secret treasure. Samantha nodded. You will get what you want the next time we meet. Eli finally couldn't hold it in anymore. There's a next time. Samantha transformed into a leopard and threw him to the ground. In an instant, she turned into a brown bear and quickly dragged Eli out of the town. I'm sorry, Samantha. I didn't mean to break the promise. I just couldn't control myself. I was worried that you would be deceived by that necromancer. Facing the furious Samantha, Eli seemed a little submissive. That's enough. Eli, I don't want to talk too much about this topic with you. You and I might have had a good time talking, but your possessiveness has suffocated me. I'm an independent individual. I have my own mind and judgment. I know what I'm doing. Samantha put her hands on her hips. We're done. Eli looked at the other party in disbelief. You're dumping me for him. Samantha's eyes were filled with pity. Can't I have my own will in your eyes? Do I only exist as an attachment to other men in your eyes? You disappoint me. Goodbye, ancient tiger. As she spoke, she turned back into a leopard. After taking a few steps, she turned around and warned, if I find out that you dare to find trouble with Mr. Matthew, you know what will happen. The leopard fluttered a few times and disappeared into the night. Eli stretched out a hand desolately as if doing so could bring back that vigorous figure. There was a burning flame on his chest. He stood there for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, he roared and transformed into a ferocious tiger that ran tirelessly. Only in this way could he temporarily forget the pain. But as he ran, he came to the oak forest north of the town. He had just been to the oak tree domain, so of course, he would not feel unfamiliar with this place. This was the necromancer's domain source. Instinctively, he raised his claws, wanting to chop down an oak tree. However, at this critical moment, he retracted his claws again. "I can't vent my anger on a tree," he muttered to himself. Samantha was probably just angry. I shouldn't have mistrusted her. That necromancer actually has the power of the oak tree domain. Samantha must have her own reasons for visiting him. Maybe I almost ruined her plan. It's normal for her to be angry. If I beg her a few more times, she should forgive me. Unknowingly, he walked to the north of the oak forest. Eli suddenly stopped in his tracks. There was a dangerous aura in the air ahead. "You're still as sharp as ever, little tiger." A coquettish female voice came from behind a rock. Eli growled, and a slender black panther walked out gracefully. "Quina," Eli said warily. The black panther slowly approached. She even walked up to Eli and tried to scratch the tiger's chin with her claws. But this action was dodged by Eli. "What's wrong, little tiger? Are you not happy that your girlfriend dumped you?" The black panther giggled and said, "Then, let me take care of you. You haven't forgotten the fun we've had, right?" "Shut up, Quina." Disgust flashed in Eli's eyes. "I was young and ignorant at that time, which was why I was seduced by you. I didn't know that you had become a member of the Withering Order. We are now mortal enemies. Get lost before I kill you." The tiger growled repeatedly. The thick killing intent solidified. The black panther wanted to tease him, but when she sensed the murderous aura, she leaped away and said, "You're really a little tiger who doesn't know how to have fun." Eli stared coldly in the direction where the other party had disappeared. His mind had not become unclear because of the breakup. If Quina appeared here, there must be other members of the Withering Order nearby. What are they doing in this town? The only forest nearby is this oak forest. Eli strolled in the forest, thinking bit by bit. Do the Witherers want to attack the oak forest? No, there must be something worse. No, I can't sit by and do nothing. The oak trees are innocent. I benefited a lot from the necromancer's domain just now. Even for that alone, I have to stop the Witherers' plot. Eli made a huge decision in his heart. He wanted to stay in the oak forest to guard this place. He was not leaving. Back in Matthew's living room. Chapter 41, Chapter 41, Matthew's living room. Chapter 41, Matthew's living room. Translator, Lonely Tree. Did that big sister with the good figure just go out through the window? Facing Sif's confusion, Matthew explained with a smile. She's a druid. Is that so? Sif placed her hands behind her back and looked a little shy. Matthew, I came here today mainly to thank you for saving my life. Matthew was stunned. Haven't you already thanked me? He was already thinking about how to reject Sif's next visit. Sif quickly took out a small bag from behind her and handed it to Matthew. Last time, it was a verbal thank you. This time, I brought a gift. Sif's eyes are shining. You won't reject me, will you? Matthew stared at the luggage in his hand, unable to refuse. Magic bag, super version 12 slots in the shortcut bar, 5 cubic meters of basic storage space, 0 weight and increased movement speed. Additional spell, biscuit spell, can automatically generate 10 biscuits per day as food. How much is this thing? Matthew asked in a hoarse voice. 1,400 gold coins. It cost me all my pocket money that I'd saved before I was 15. Sif said frankly. But it doesn't matter. I'll be 16 soon. My father will give me a lot of pocket money again. I can't take it. It's too expensive. Matthew said with a conflicted expression. My life is worth more than 1,400 gold coins. Sif smiled and said, and I've already bought it. You know the situation in Rolling Stone Town. There aren't many mages, and no one else can use it. Matthew looked troubled. A phantom rushed into the kitchen and snatched the luggage. I'll accept it on his behalf. Peggy said loudly. Matthew glared at her. Did you tell her that I really want a better backpack? Peggy spread her hands. I said that you only wanted an enhanced version, the one that costs 500 gold coins. Who knew that she would buy the super version? Sif spread her hands. Anyway, the gift has already been given out. You can't return it back for me. As she spoke, she slumped lazily on the sofa. Matthew sighed and said, Okay. I appreciate your kindness. I really need this. Thank you, Sif. Sif blinked. Everyone wants you back in class. I am interested in history, but the books are so boring. Matthew shook his head helplessly. I really don't have time for classes recently, but if you want, I can teach you in private. Sure, Sif straightened up from the sofa. Let's start from the 100 City Division. Last time, you didn't teach me how the Seven Saint Alliance ruled the 100 city-states. He returned to his room and took out a thick history book. Then, he sat in front of Sif and began to explain. Rigger, who was trying to hide in the haystack, was shocked when he heard the conversation in the living room. Is it just a lecture? A carefree skeleton walked out of the kitchen door. Rigger curled his body. The skeleton circled around the windowsill and walked back. Fortunately, it didn't discover me. Rigger was rejoicing. Suddenly, he heard a conversation coming from the room. Matthew, I've found a legal, stable, and profitable way to make money. Do tell. We can use your charm and seduce a few underage girls to come to our house for classes. Then, we can sell the sitting area around the windowsill for a high price. Huh. How do you know it won't work if you don't give it a try? Since we have a potential customer, you should go and ask. Rigger silently raised his head. Then, he met Matthew's complicated gaze. Mr. Rigger, would you buy a ticket? Matthew asked politely. Chapter 42, Tower Spirit. Chapter 42, Tower Spirit. At 3:50, Matthew opened his eyes on time. After washing up, he went to the kitchen to grab a loaf of bread and left the house amidst the chirping of birds in the morning. He did not leave the mage area as usual. Instead, he walked toward the center of the mage area, where no one else had ever visited. The morning of early spring was still cold. Matthew walked past a well-maintained bush. Drops of dew swirled along the leaves, and a few drops even spilt on his shoes. He wolfed down the bread and stood in front of a two-story house in the middle of the mage area. Dong dong dong. The bell suddenly rang from the bungalow. This meant that it was 4 o'clock sharp. Matthew quickly stepped forward. He gently knocked on the door with his right hand until an exaggerated face appeared on the door. He then said the password, "A day's plan is in the morning." The strange face split open quickly, revealing a dark, dome-shaped entrance. "Good morning, Matthew. Welcome to Crucible House. I'll wait for you on the top floor. Remember to press the acceleration button on the elevator a few more times. You'll experience an extraordinary pleasure." A mechanical voice came from inside. Matthew lowered his head and walked in. What appeared in front of him was an extremely vast space. The floor was paved with a strange material like mercury, the dome of the sky was lined with stars, 6 marble pillars rose into the sky, and the two sides were lined with sculpture like automatons. This was the Crucible House. It was part of a mage tower that the great mage Ronan had made public. Here, you could buy magic tools and materials, borrow magic books, rent magic laboratories, forge magic equipment, find an adventuring team, and so on. It was similar to the Adventurers Guild in many online games, except that the Crucible House only served mages. Moreover, the entry time was very strict. It was only 15 minutes between 4 in the morning and 4:15 in the morning. If they missed it, they would have to come back the next day. There were at least 4 entrances to the Crucible House south of Eversong Forest. However, Matthew never bumped into anyone every time he came here. He speculated that it might be because there were too few mages in this world at the moment and that the Crucible House charged an entrance fee. 30 gold coins each time wasn't too expensive, but it was still an expense. If he did not have the need to borrow books from this place, he would never have come to the Crucible House. The food and service here were good but expensive. The materials and tools provided by Master Ronan were much better than those outside. But if Matthew had a choice, he would rather travel a few hundred kilometers to Bian City to find a familiar merchant to buy the same materials and tools. Unfortunately, he had no choice. This was the kind of place where one would unconsciously bend over when they entered the door if they were not rich. Matthew walked to the nearest marble pillar. This was actually a magic elevator hidden in the pillar. You could go to the floor you wanted according to your needs. Different floors had different constructs to serve you. Of course, you could also choose to have human servers receive you, but it would cost more. When Matthew approached, he was surprised to find a woman wearing black-rimmed glasses and a traditional robe waiting anxiously before the elevator. Ding! The pillar rotated to both sides, and the magic elevator appeared in front of them. "Ah, why don't you go first?" the female mage said to Matthew somewhat unnaturally. She seemed to be particularly constrained. Matthew sized her up and shook his head. "No, you go first. I'll wait for the next one." The female mage was a little surprised. However, after seeing Matthew's determined expression, she was shocked. She quickly nodded and thanked him in a low voice. Then, she jogged into the lift. By the way, if a voice asks you to press the acceleration button later, remember to reject it. The elevator doors were about to close. Matthew smiled and gave his advice. Through the crack, the female mage tilted her head in confusion. The elevator went up in an instant. Matthew waited patiently for a few minutes. A brand new elevator booth unfolded in front of him. He walked in calmly. As a close friend of Ronan, the privilege he enjoyed in the Crucible House was Tower Spirit 177's service. This would greatly facilitate him to find what he wanted in the vast sea of Imolage. There was no need to pay labor fees. Matthew was very grateful for this. The elevator doors slowly closed. He could feel himself rising at a slow and comfortable speed. A stiff voice rang in his ears. "Sir, according to the current speed, you will need 29 hours and 7 minutes to reach the floor you want. So, do you need an accelerated service? I am your friendly companion, Tower Spirit No. 247. Matthew immediately refused. "No. Don't play this kind of trick anymore. 177, you sound like a broken record." The voice continued, 177 has been killed and replaced by me, 369. Now I control the Crucible House. If you don't want to fall, you better press the acceleration button. It will make you very happy." Matthew smiled and said, "It can indeed make people very happy, but I'm sorry, I've already vomited once. After that time, I swear I won't fall for your trick again." The voice laughed coldly. Part 3 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.